All right, welcome to the Field of 68. This is our Off the Carousel series where we take first-time head coaches or first-year head coaches at their new spot. We give you a little preview of what's to come. Today, we have none other than the Jack Castleberry, who's taking over at Fairleigh Dickinson. Yes, that's right, the Fairleigh Dickinson, who made the run in the tournament with the improbable win over Purdue and losing to eventual champions Florida Atlantic. And now they have a new head coach. Jack, first of all, congratulations on the new gig. And secondly, thank you for being on.
Well, thank you for having me. The fact that I'm on here is just incredible to begin with. So it's been it's awesome to see you again and just appreciate the time.
It's nuts. When I heard that you were in the running to get this job, I was like, man, how quick life can turn around. Because a lot of people that don't know, like you've been an assistant coach for a long time. You've spent some time in the Northeast. You're a women's assistant at Siena, and
Yeah.
then got back on the men's side for a while. You were the Dobo at this spot, that spot, wherever, and then you end up at the Citadel. You're a military guy. VMI is your undergrad. You played there. Go to Citadel. You get your grad degree there, and then it's like one thing happens. You're at Citadel for 5 years. Some things happen. You're let go. Then you end up at Queens for all of about 2 weeks. And then I get a text message saying, "Hey, I'm heading up. I'm going to be able to stay Division One. I'm going to be at Fairleigh Dickinson." You guys have 1 year there. You make it. You make the second round of the NCAA tournament. Now you're the head coach. I mean, talk
Yeah.
to me about this
Yeah.
process, dude. This was crazy.
Well, listen, I've had a career path that I wouldn't recommend for anybody, but it's obviously you sit there and go, "Hey, I got here," you know.
Hmm.
So you don't want to change any of it. And there's a million things that I've learned along the ways from all those different spots. I mean, I got out of college basketball for 2 years altogether, and worked in financial planning in the middle of that whole thing. But so it's not a traditional path, and I certainly I try to think about where we started the question because it's such a long-winded process to go through all that. But I don't want to say a military guy. I appreciate that, but there's the real military guys out there. I went to a military school. I didn't actually,
Right. Right.
serve in the military. So, with respect to that, because I went with a lot of guys that are good dudes that did go into the military and all that stuff. But have definitely been at some difficult places to win. But I've learned from great people. I mean, Tobin Anderson's an incredible basketball coach. Nobody's surprised that he's won. Anybody who's followed college basketball at the small college level has known that he was going to win here. I don't think we thought it was going to happen quite as fast as it did, but he'll have success wherever he ends up moving forward. I mean, you could put him on some random team on Mars and he'd find a way to win.
Sure.
But then going back to Duger Balcom, who's been a huge part of my life, who's like a second father to me. I played for him at VMI and coached for him at VMI in the Citadel. And you want to talk about a guy who was innovative and doing things that people weren't doing in 2007. So a guy who wasn't afraid to take a lot of risks and also cared deeply about his players. I learned a ton from him, and then I worked for Allie Jackson Siena, and she was great. I learned a lot from being my 2 years with that. And then I started at UT Martin with Brett Campbell, who had a guy named Lester Hudson who led him to a conference championship. That was probably 2009.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been in some locations that are different than most people's ideal paths as far as like where the most likely places to win, if you will. But I've been in spots where I've been around good people that knew what they were doing, and I learned a lot from that process.
We were talking before we came on to this recording, and it's like, well, how's it been to be the head man in charge? That's a lot of people talk about that shift, and you're just now getting a glimpse of it. What's it
Yeah.
been like in these initial months in this process?
Yeah, it's been everything that people say it's going to be. It's a little bit like that. You kind of have to experience it to fully appreciate it,
Mm.
because you do get inundated with texts and phone calls and emails and all the stuff that you appreciate, especially people reaching out. Obviously, you've been there as an assistant, trying to find a job. So there's those things, and you want to make sure you treat all that with respect because you can remember exactly what that was like. Me in particular, being a year ago, a guy who was out of a job.
Mm.
And then you're overwhelmed with a little bit the reality of like, hey, I have a lot more responsibility or different responsibilities than I had before. You're just getting pulled in different directions than what you're used to.
Mm.
And look, there's a million assistants who are overwhelmed too, but it's just a different form of it, if you will. I do think some of the best advice I got was from people telling me, "Hey, don't let the moment speed you up, as much as you're going to feel the need to make all these decisions really quickly because there's a different type of pressure. Just slow down. You will actually be able to make the decision that you need to make and get what you need to get done, even if you slow down. And you have to be intentional. And I was intentional in trying to make sure I was doing that from, who are we going to sign to who are we going to hire and all that sort of stuff. And I think it was really helpful. And now that you do have the staff in place, it has slowed down and is in a manageable pace, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. You talked about a few coaches earlier. You talked about Tobin. You talked about Duger. Like, who has influenced you the most, and where do you see your playing style as a head coach? Is it going to be more, score 120 points like it was at VMI? Is it going to
Yeah, yeah,
be
yeah.
some of these other things? Because obviously you adjust to your players, but with your core beliefs, I mean, who influenced you the most in terms of that?
Well, I think it's hard to get away from Coach B, Duger Balkum, and how he influenced me, just because I played for him. I worked for him for the better part of a decade. And just the way he went about managing relationships with players, his up tempo style, like that stuff will always stick with me. We're going to play the same way that we played here last year with Tobin.
Mm,
Press, motion offense. Uh, the motion offense was new to me. The press, not as much, because obviously we pressed the VMI
sure.
and pressed for the first part of our tenure there at the Citadel. But the motion stuff and stuff, and I've watched Tobin's team for a long time. Him and I have been friends for a decade. My relationship with him goes back to being a camper at 5-star basketball camp and him being a counselor,
Mm,
running Station 13 and all that stuff. But the motion was really, I bought into it very quickly, and to see it play out when I think it's kind of the way that we used to play at the Citadel and VMI, playing up tempo, shoot a ton of threes. That used to be relatively unique.
mm,
College basketball, it's not quite as unique as it used to be. To me, the motion offense, the true motion offense, is a lot more unique now than it was 20 years ago.
right.
Because now everything is so much about spacing and getting into a high ball screen, and we still have those conversations, but there's a lot more player movement throughout a possession, a lot more decisions that are being made on the floor by the players, a lot less micromanagement, from a coaching staff perspective, and it's just teaching guys how to play within this system and then making good decisions. So, it's something that I've really bought into. I think our players obviously buy into it. How can you not buy into it after what we just did? And so we're going to continue down that path.
You're at a place in Fairleigh Dickinson that you guys won 21 games last year, did a terrific job. The year before, there was a 4-win team. Before that, it was 9 wins. Before that was 11. Uh, what do you have to do in order to keep this positive momentum going? What do you think that X factor is for people who have now become familiar with FDU to kind of recognize that as a brand that's going to continue winning?
I think you kind of, well, there's two parts to that, I guess. And my thoughts are, part of the reason that we were able to be great last year was because we have really special people in this program.
Mm,
Like, there's high character dudes in that locker room. There wasn't one quote unquote jerk in that locker room, if you will. And they are all undervalued. Nobody else wanted them, right?
mhm.
Uh, our best, some of our best players last year came from the Division II ranks, right? So we have to continue to recruit high character people that have a chip on their shoulder.
Sure.
And if we continue to do that, I think we'll be just fine. Um, I think from a recruiting standpoint, we have to own who we are. Like, we're always going to be this, hey, gritty. We're not going to have the bells and whistles that everybody else has. Now, our athletic department is, our AD, Brad Hurlbut and Jason Young, have done an incredible job, along with our president, Mike Albatroni, of investing in our program. And we're going to start seeing some really cool things pop up around here that will enhance our players' experience day in and day out. But at the end of the day, we are who we are, and
Mm.
we're going to go find those guys that other people don't want, and then we're going to develop them, and we're going to, hopefully do well with them. And that's what we've done so far. And I don't see why we would need to change the formula to that to continue to have success. And it should also be noted, like, they did struggle a few years prior to us getting hired last year,
Mhm.
but we've been to 3 NCAA tournaments out like the last 7 years.
Right.
So FDU has won historically here, and it won't be last year. Obviously, the big change was the massive turnaround, right? Like, that was exciting. Um, but it's been done here before, and it can continue to be done here.
You're playing in a Northeast Conference that, while it doesn't necessarily have the notoriety, it has some teams that, kind of like you said, are gritty, can make some things happen. I had the opportunity to call St. Francis and Sacred Heart last year. That's two hard playing teams with two really
Yep.
good coaches. And then on top of that, you have Merrimack and Stonehill that, I don't know what
Yep.
their NCAA tournament situation is, but I mean, that's two more teams that are tough.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about this conference. I mean, you've had a year in it, not that long, but all of
Yeah.
that being said, you have a lot of guys that, like you said, have a chip on their shoulder. There's good coaching. Even, you look at the bottom of the league, LIU's got Strickland over there messing around. We're going to see exactly how that goes. I mean, it's a league that, while it doesn't necessarily have the size, you can find guys that can really play. Josh Cohen was a great example of that. Jordan Minor was a great
Yep.
example of that.
Yep. I think you have a variety of styles within the same league.
Yeah.
If you think about Wagner, you think about like gritty, tough, defensive minded, right? I
Mhm.
think about Sacred Heart. I think about playing really fast, and I think about if you talk about Coach Krimmel over there at St. Francis, PA, like they were very post centric last year, which you
Yep.
don't see a ton of that, like a traditional post. You don't see a ton of that anymore. Then you go Merrimack and you talk about their zone, right? So
Mhm.
there's a variety of different styles within this league, and I don't think it's I think you go to other leagues a lot of times, it's just kind of copy and paste, copy and paste, copy and paste to some degree within the league. And I think here you don't get the same thing night in and night out.
Yeah. That's a great point. There were some there's good players everywhere. That's what I
Yeah,
try to tell people.
absolutely.
I mean, you know this, at the Citadel, you'll find guys. You found Jason Roach,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you find different guys. There's players everywhere. That's one thing about the Northeast Conference. Whenever you see Coach Krimmel, you make sure you tell him I said hello. That league, though, like you said, you're constantly adjusting on a night to night basis given the team you're playing. And let me ask you this, and this kind of just came to me right now. Is
yeah.
it something to where you go into every game thinking like, well, we have to adjust to this, we have to adjust to that? Or is it something that you say, well, we're going to do what we believe in and then make them adjust to us?
Yeah, I think that's a constant balance, right?
Right.
One of the great strengths, in my opinion, I learned so much from Tobin last year, man. One of the great strengths about the way that he approaches the season as a whole is that there's not a lot of overreaction to when things aren't going right, and it's something that I had to learn throughout that season of like, okay, we had nights where the press wasn't very good, and there's a lot of thought about do we go away from some of the press stuff, or do we need to run more sets here? And I think part of the reason we got really good, and obviously last year was my first year on staff with them. He had two other guys who were great assistant coaches, and Tom Bonicum and Cam Morrell, and we had Ray Savage, who's a dub over at Iron now, just awesome dudes who are really good at their jobs. But they were great at helping me adapt to the way we do things. And okay, so part of the reason that we get good late in February and March is because we don't differ, we don't panic, we just
Sure.
stick doing what we do, and that's exactly what happened throughout the season. Our press got really good, we became a better half court defensive team, and our motion really clicked in at the right time, and that was really just because we stayed the course. So you certainly make your adjustments, you game plan for specific things this team's going to do, but you can't just lose sight of what you're trying to accomplish, especially playing this style, because we're trying to be disruptive. So if
Right.
we stop trying to be disruptive, it's not going to be effective.
Sure. Well, one more thing. You hired Tom. Is it Kiley or Keeley? I always mess this up.
Kylie,
It's
Kylie, yeah,
you hired Tom Kiley. And this is
yep,
important. You're up in the north. You're up in the Northeast, Teaneck, New Jersey. Tom's college roommate was none other
yeah, yes,
than John Fanta.
the one and only.
So make sure you guys get John Fanta up there to Teaneck, New Jersey. Jack, thank you so much for being a part. Wishing you the best of luck from the field of 68. This was Off the Carousel. And Jack Castleberry now has the reins at everybody's Cinderella, Fairleigh Dickinson. Thank you for jumping on.
Thanks, man.